We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Leonhardt, if an agent stateside were soliciting a prostitute that was provided by a drug conspiracy he was investigating, what punishment would you recommend?
I can't recommend a punishment. I would just hope that would be thoroughly investigated. And
so you're telling me nobody cares what the administrator of the DEA thinks should happen to an agent? You're powerless to express your opinion. You have no First Amendment right when it comes to who works for your agency.
I have expressed my opinion in
What
a
was
number
your
of
opinion?
ways.
What did you express? What did you think the proper sanction was?
Last year, I sent email and I sent a memo to every employee in DEA and put them on notice that this kind of conduct was not acceptable.
My question must have been ambiguous because I wasn't talking about future conduct. I was talking about past conduct. What punishment did you recommend for conduct that happened in the past?
Under the civil service law, I cannot recommend a penalty. I can't intervene in the disciplinary process. I can't even make a recommendation.
What does it take to get, what would it, hypothetically, what would it take to get fired as a DEA agent? Because the agents I used to work with were worried about using their car to go pick up dry cleaning. They were actually worried about using their OGV to pick up dry cleaning. They were worried about being disciplined. So apparently that world has changed. Do you know whether any of the prostitutes were underage?
I don't know that.
Would that impact whatever recommendation you might have in terms of a sanction?
I don't recommend the sanction. I can't fire. I can't recommend a penalty. There's a guide that the deciding officials abide by, and they have a penalty guide that they look at. And the penalty guide for this kind of activity is anything from reprimand to removal.
How about security clearance? Do you have any impact over that, whether or not an agent has a security clearance?
No, there's adjudicative guidelines, and that has to be adjudicated by the security people.
What power do you have? You have to work with agents over whom you can't discipline and have no control, and you have no control over the security clearance. What the hell do you get to do?
What I can do is build on and improve mechanisms to make sure that the outcome is what we believe the outcome should be. And that is what happened in Cartagena. That is what's going to happen moving forward.
Inspector General Horowitz, I find that stunning. Let me ask you this. Did the agents know that the cartels were providing the prostitutes?
What we found, Congressman, from looking in the file was that they should have known, given their trained law enforcement agents, and they were dealing with corrupt law enforcement, local law enforcement, that was providing them with the prostitutes as well as the various gifts.
Were they supposed to be investigating these cartels?
They were.
So they are receiving prostitutes from cartels that they are supposed to be investigating. And she can't fire those agents. You agree with her? She can't fire them?
I think as a matter of Title V, she can't directly intervene and fire them. I do think one of the concerns we outline in the report as to DEA and the other 3 agencies is how they adjudicate these cases. They undercharge them in some instances. And so at DEA, for example, sexual harassment, if you're charged with that, there's only one punishment: removal. But if you're charged with conduct unbecoming or poor judgment, which isn't even actually a category, then you've got a range of penalties. And so one of the issues, as you know as a former prosecutor, is how you charge the case. And that has a consequence.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what would need to be done, but I, like my friend from South Carolina, find it stunning that you can solicit prostitutes. Administrator Leonhardt, do we know whether any of the prostitutes were underage? Do we know whether any of them were part of any human trafficking rings?
Because the Bogota case happened a decade ago, there were no interviews of prostitutes. On the more recent one, the Cartagena one, it did not identify an age for the prostitute involved.
Mr. Chairman, I would just find it impossible to explain to any reasonable-minded person how an agent cannot be disciplined for soliciting prostitutes from drug cartels that they were ostensibly investigating. I find that stunning.
If the gentleman will yield, if somebody murdered somebody, could you fire him?
If someone murdered someone, there would be criminal charges, and that's how they'd be fired.
But if they were, could you take away their security clearance?
The Office's security programs can review security clearances and take their clearances, just as they did with the 3 agents in the Cartagena incident.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
Gentleman, yield for just a second. I'm sorry, I heard you say that there's one thing you could actually fire somebody for, which is sexual harassment. So let me see if I get this correct, Mr. Horowitz, Mrs. Leonhardt. If I flirt with a coworker in the office and that constitutes sexual harassment, I can be fired, but I can take an underage hooker from a cartel I'm investigating, and you can't fire me. Is that what we're talking about here?
Actually, Congressman, if you charge the offense, removal is a possibility. If you charge something less, conduct unbecoming or poor judgment, you don't charge what actually occurred, that's when the ability to discipline is limited. And that's the concern we found, as you know, in our report.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, both from South